Good evening, everyone. My name is Mona El-Kafif. I'm the director of the urban design at the University of Virginia School of Architecture. I'm excited to welcome you today to the first panel of our virtual symposium, Empowering a Global Just Energy Transition, a Lithium Trilogy. The three-part event is a part of a larger research project entitled Lithium Territories that investigates the socio-environmental, spatial, economic, and temporal entanglements of the just energy transition. This academic initiative is a collaboration between Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, the University of Michigan, and the University of Virginia. The project is sponsored by a grant that co-PIs Maria Acuero, Ayla Berman, Alejandra Brosch, and myself received from the UVA Center of Global Inquiry and Innovation. This grant was granted to build a larger network of experts in the field and to integrate these topic areas into our curriculum. Our joint research area addresses a pressing global challenge: the mandate to take climate action and reverse the path towards planetary collapse. Using lithium as a critical matter powering the energy transition, we examine its life cycle from extraction to manufacturing, consumption, and recycling to understand socio-environmental and economic relationships. By connecting our cell phone terminals, electric car batteries to lithium mines in Chile, manufacturing plants in the Asian Pacific region, and gigafactories in the US, we hope to trace the global flows that power every aspect of our lives and transform ecosystems and livelihood globally. This symposium was co-organized by Professor Jimena Arizaga from PUC, who will moderate today, Maria Acuero from Michigan, our two graduate research assistants, Joaquin Liu and Meredith Hughes, as well as myself. Please stay tuned for our upcoming panels and keynote featured on the slides. All information can also be accessed through our website, www.lithiumterritories.net. And with this, I'm going to hand it over to Jimena. Thank you for joining us today.
Muchas gracias, Mona. Voy a compartirles una pequeña introducción.
Introductory words concerning this first session. Now, we shall be dealing concerning on aspects related to extraction, lithium, and this is the introductory part of the following sessions. Now, in our urban lives, undoubtedly, we cannot hear her properly. She needs to address into a microphone. We can utilize electricity, solar energies in our households, in our homes. We have hot water, wind energy. We cannot hear her. If we could just inform Jimena that we cannot hear her properly, that would really be helpful. Many of our characteristics of our modern life, we do not know where the energy comes from. The energy
Jimena, can you just speak more directly into your microphone or into the place where your audio is coming in? I think the translators are having a hard time hearing. Thank you.
Exactly, that's better. And please, we should not move your faces. Your mouth has to be directed into your microphone. These energies are extracted. In other words, material that allows this energy comes from distant territories, in other words, from different geographies, where we see flora and fauna that inhabit these regions, very ancient inhabitants of these territories. And of course, they are affected by the interventions because of these extractions. Before the creation of these projects, of course, we do need environmental assessments where we see the participation of different disciplines, biologists, anthropologists, engineers, sociologists, and so on and so forth. On this item, this is where we see important issues. In other words, how important or pertinent it is to extract lithium from these areas. In other words, concerning the identity and potential uses, like, for example, tourism. We shall be listening to three speeches with regards to the challenges of lithium in these territories, and we shall focus on the Chilean territories, specifically in Maricumba and surrounding areas, because Chile possesses approximately 60% of the world lithium reserves, followed by Australia, that has 20%, in Argentina, approximately 15%. Now, during these presentations, we shall be giving the floor, first of all, to the professor on natural science from the University of Antofagasta, the von Humboldt in University. He comes from the Euler University, and he works in the Aquaculture University of Antofagasta. Thereafter, Yeri Marambio, he's a director in applied science at the University of Antofagasta. And finally, Osvaldo Moreno, he's a professor in architecture and urbanism from the University of La Plata and from the Pontifical University, the Catholic University. In that order. Therefore, we give the floor now to Jorge. Thank you kindly, Jimena. I will be sharing my screen with you. Yes, we can hear you properly. Yes. Thank you. Good afternoon to all of you, and thank you so much for your kind invitation. This is a great opportunity to be able to show you the work that we've been carrying out in the Andean, in the northern part of Chile. It's a zone that has certain specificity that we shall be analyzing during my presentation. And us, as a working team, we have our own opinions on how to treat this territory when we talk about productive entities. We shall now be addressing, in general terms, this territory that is located between 26, 27, 28 southern latitude at a height that goes from 3,000 to 45,000 meters above sea level. And here, in spite of the fact that we are in the desert of Atacama, one of the driest deserts in the planet, we have a series of aquatic systems that say that this vital resources for life and many other activities is present in this territory. More or less 24, 25 aquatic systems are found in this location in Chile, in the northern part of this country, which are categorized in lagoons, in salt lagoons, rivers. Hence, we have a diversity of systems and sizes as well, within which the potential of lithium mining is quite high. As a matter of fact, this is one of the greatest areas with potential for lithium mining. There are certain specificities in this region. One of these, and maybe the most important one, is that at this height, between 3,000 and 5,000 meters of height, or 6,000, which is the highest site associated to one of the volcanoes, there are no human settlements. There weren't in the past. There are no indigenous peoples that settled in this region and that developed communities. Neither are there cities at present. Therefore, for the effect concerning the knowledge of citizenry, they don't know much about it. And these are the main problems, because when we talk about conserving or managing a territory, it cannot be done if we do not know that territory. For you to have an idea, the nearest cities in this fringe of altitude where these aquatic systems are found, it's more or less 130, 140 kilometers distance from the Copiapó city. But when we started working in this zone, we spoke with the people of Copiapó, and they didn't know the Andean region at 150 kilometers in distance. the distance isn't large. Therefore, it was an unexplored region. The only things that existed as background information, we cannot see your presentation. Well, here it is. I can see it. I'm sharing my presentation with you. Oh, hold on. Yes, we do. We can see it. You can, right? Yes, we can. No, we cannot see it right now. No, we cannot.
Ahora no, pero recién sí, Jimena.
Espérate, voy a compartir de nuevo, a ver. Vamos de nuevo.
Ahora sí.
¿Sí?
Sí.
Ya, reproducir. Bueno, haciendo un pequeño resumen entonces, ¿no es cierto?
Summarizing everything. Okay, so this is the territory in the Andean region of the Atacama Desert, in one of the driest deserts. It's a height between 3,000 and 4,500 meters in height, where we can see aquatic systems, saline lagoons, and with different characteristics and rivers. Of course, mining activity is quite intense, mainly in the last few years associated to lithium mining. As I said, one of the particularities of this territory, it's unknown to citizenry at large because there are no human settlements at this height. There are no original people that had developed communities, cities, and therefore it's very difficult to manage because we do not know the territory. The nearest people that live here are the Copiapó city, 150 kilometers in distance. They do not know the Andean region, and they do not know what exists up above concerning resources, landscapes, and potential activities that might take place. Although, from a historical standpoint, the Andean region, here you can see it on the right-hand side of the map. It's a red circle. We shall be talking about this. It was part of the route of the Inca people back then, but no products were seen from the original peoples. Nothing was generated in this region. In other words, no settlements, to understand that it's quite a habitable region. It's inhospitable with regards to human settlements. It was also part of the Magro entrance, and this tranche that he covered from the crossing of Argentina into Chile. It must have been the most difficult part that he had to face because of climate circumstances and water resources. Because in spite of the fact of much water in this Andean region, we'll see that there are many specificities and, it's not for human use. During the 19th century, the most that we had with regards to the human experience transiting through this territory is commercial exchange between Argentina and Chile at the start of the 20th century. It lasted a few years, where, as a matter of fact, during the spring and the start of summer, the cattle owners of Argentina used to go back to Copiapó, exchange of products. And of course, there are extreme weather circumstances in this territory. It's an unknown, unexplored territory. As a matter of fact, when we started working in this specific region, there were only 2 scientific articles that had been published, mainly concerning geology and chemical concerning salt pans. Hence, we were interested to start working here, and we did it under a project funded by the Chilean government. We did it under 2 stages between 2013 and 2019, where what we produced was, first of all, that there was little knowledge concerning the water systems in the Andean. In other words, we had to characterize things with a baseline, what we might convey concerning our scientific capabilities in terms of the sediments concerning the first part of the project. Can you all hear me? Somebody interrupted me. So here we have a series of analysis that we did to be able to study the elements within these water systems or aquatic systems and the water column. And we included as well the microbiological communities because under these extreme environments, the microbiological communities have a biotechnological potential. In other words, we were able to understand, to see if there were further productive potentials, not necessarily through extractive mining systems, but other productive things, but of course associated to extractive mining, that if they had other components belonging to this territory. And finally, within here, we included everything that had to do with the organism communities that live in these aquatic regions where there's water, there are different organisms, and we shall see further on. We shall talk about this in depth. Now, with all the information that we generated in the first stage, the second stage was focused on 4 main elements that have to do with the dissemination and to be able to show this territory to the communities, the potential, the characteristics, the landscape, and everything that can be found in this Andean region, so that the community at large, and not only the technical people or scientific communities, neither only the government, but everybody, to be able to understand what exists in this territory near to where they live. But they don't know anything about it. Now, a second objective was to carry out trainings precisely with the information that we had. This conveyed to the tourist operators, which were very few back then, I believe 4 or 5 tourist operators that visited this Andean region, mainly to foreign tourists. Basically, there were no Chilean tourists that covered as tourists this region. The majority were European. And this tourist operators worked with little knowledge of the territory, but rather with the willingness to be able to develop things in such an interesting territory, but they needed further knowledge. So with our help, so that they might be able to transmit this information to tourists. In other words, further information concerning these aquatic regions in this territory. And the third thing was to contribute to an idea that the government still had and still has, to increase protected areas, specifically in the Atacama Andean region. At present, there is one single national park in the Andean region where we can find some of the territories that we studied. And these are protected areas where, of course, the people there are required understanding the characteristics of water, the organisms found in that region, the state of conservation concerning these organisms, and so on and so forth. And lastly, an environmental assessment, because we were going to working on the chemistry of the sediments and the water. Sediments, it's important to be able to use this information to generate an environmental assessment when we visited the region. Fortunately, we commenced working in this region back in 2013, where we had merely started talking and projecting lithium mining. Hence, we were able to start before the installment of these future mining prospects. So we have a baseline that covers with the characteristic. We have prior information before the productive activities took place. Thus, during the 6 years in which the project lasted, we carried out terrain campaigns. We covered the complete Andean region. We visited more or less 22 aquatic systems, 3 rivers, 6 lagoons, and other salt pans. And we visited these regions in different parts of the year. In dry regions, for example, you can see this picture up above, and the rainy or winter. And this corresponds to 2 weather regions, the traditional, which is May, June, July. In this Andean, it's winter. And then we have here the plateau winter, where once again we see snow again, and the characteristics of the landscape changes abruptly. So we covered this territory under these two conditions, taking samples of different things, like, for example, water samples from the rivers, lagoons, the salt pans, physical chemical variables, or in-depth sediments in these systems. We placed methodologies. We visited some of the largest lagoons that we found in this region, and the biologists visited or covered and studied the quantification of flora and fauna associated to each one of these aquatic systems, because you need to understand that the existence of life in these region, flora and fauna, depends completely with the existence of water. Hence, if there's no water, there's no life. This is how these systems, drastic systems are, because this is what we had to study. And what did we do with this information? In the environmental assessment chapter, these are the results that I'm going to show you further on. And Jerry will be addressing the biological communities that maybe are more interesting. It's something more visible. It has a greater impact to be able to be charmed with this territory. But the environmental assessment, we wanted to assess the quality of the sediments of the water that we found in these high Andean regions. We took samples of all the systems and the different points and different regions of the year. We studied the physical, chemical, and the metals. We saw metals in waters and sediments to be able to assess environmentally under the light of the current legislation, which at present refers to the presence of metals and how these metals can be transformed into a risk for the health of the communities and organisms that live there, or for people when this water is used for irrigation or consumption purposes. And here, merely as an example, some of the results of the metals in the water. The majority of these metals were below the detection limits. We worked with optic isotopes, so we had great levels of detection, but the majority of these metals were below detection. Arsenic and copper conveyed interesting values, and beyond the range of values that we can establish for each one of the 12 metals that we analyzed, we were able to commence seeing a few things associated to the different types of, I think he said salt pans, the salt pans that we studied, and each one of the bars represents the concentration of these metals in their total or dissolved form in each one of these bars. So here we can see that there are certain salt pans that have interesting aspects from a chemical standpoint. This is a lagoon, a very small salt lagoon. It has high concentration of arsenic. We're talking of natural systems. This is a period in history where no lithium extraction had taken place. Hence, these are natural conditions. Hence, and we found chemical conveys particularities which are different to others. And this is what we were searching when we were carrying out these chemical analysis. You know, these specificities that make things different from others. And thereafter, we were able to deepen these studies and understand the differences, like, for example, the concentration of arsenic in one of the salt pans we studied. And here we see some of the metals we analyzed, but this in the sediments, where we see little difference. In some cases, there is a distribution of concentration of these salt pans. In the case of copper, it's quite uniform. And in certain cases, we start seeing the appearance of certain differences. For example, el salar, la farina, I think it has concentration of, we couldn't hear that. And this is part of what we propose as a preliminary conclusion in the study that we carried out regarding metals in these waters. Now, these systems are not always intervened, or rather in the region or in the period in which we carried out the studies, because in these water bodies, but yes, they can receive through atmospheric transportation the discards that come from other further or distant mining activities. Hence, one of the metals eventually, like in the case of lead, might be explained of the atmospheric movement that reaches the Andean region and can be deposited in these water regions. Because in different studies in these aquatic systems in Peru, Argentina, in Bolivia and Chile that has taken place, well, we find traces of the mining activities that take place in the Amazon region. Hence, it's no news that certain metals and certain discards of distant movements can be transported long distance and thereafter be deposited in the Andean region. Hence, the first signal is that industrial extractive industry directly on the environment, not necessarily, because now we're studying these aquatic regions, have an impact. They also receive atmospheric impacts from distant areas. Let's remember that we are in the northern part of Chile, in the Atacama region, where the mining activities, par excellence, is the extractive handling of different metals, and all of this produces powder, or dust that can be transported through the predominant winds inside and be deposited in the Andean region. The other thing that we produced, thanks to these studies, was to analyze if the water that we find in these regions serve for drinking purposes or for irrigation purposes of anything. And this was done following the Chilean standard, which establishes the maximum concentration, in this case of arsenic and copper, that water needs to have for these to be utilized for drinking purposes or irrigation ones. As a matter of fact, none of the systems all the systems are outside of the range of concentration where it might be allowed for this water to be utilized for irrigation or drinking. Now, in the case of arsenic, everything's above, except Corbea complies for irrigation purposes. So here, unfortunately, when we talk about water quality, from an environmental perspective, we incorrectly mention good or bad quality water. So we show these results. Well, the result of water is bad. It doesn't serve or help out for drinking, neither for irrigation. But this is an anthropocentric reasoning, because although the water that we find in these systems does not comply for drinking irrigation characteristics, of course, it does uphold a microbiological community and microorganisms which are important, that shows us that this water definitely completes or fulfills a function to sustain these systems, extreme ecosystems. They're quite fragile concerning issues. So with all the chemical analysis of water and sediments, we also wanted to analyze which are they similar or not, to see differences. In these prior cases, when we see the distribution of the 22 systems that are distributed in this map, and we place it in this map to see how we can group these systems, you see the three large groups. One, green, which are the salt pans in green down below. And if you look at them geographically, they're located on the west of the region, more towards less altitude, from 3,000 meters high to the Andean, up to 4,500 or 5,000 meters high. And on the other hand, we have lagoons that are located in the northeastern part of the region.
Aquí en rojo, aquí en el medio del mapa, ¿no es cierto? Que es el
Just
salar.
like we saw in one of the maps, which is in red, has some specificities that are different from the rest of them. And this one is very important because when we decided to propose preservation or protection measure, we need to find these characteristics. the differences between one ecosystem from another, because that's where we can find specificities from that system that are not found anywhere else. And that's we can have a precedent to protect this type of system. This is in the case of salt flats. In the case of lagoons, which is the other system that we studied, so salt flats, lagoons, and rivers. For the rivers, we studied 2 rivers. So it's not worthwhile to do a differential analysis. However, for the lagoons, it is pertinent. We studied 6 of them, and we found one here, number 18, called Laguna Verde, Green Lagoon, which is quite different from the others. It has very important specificities regarding the chemicals in the water and its sediments. So we have been analyzing a andine ecosystem from extreme weather conditions, and we find different ecosystems with specificities that come from the sediment and materials that we find from each system. This is a summary of the microbiology study, which is the bacteria study. So all the bacteria that live within the waters and the sediments of all the systems that we analyzed with a chemical point of view. So the bacterial community that could have a high biotechnology potential are very studied to analyzing these extreme characteristics, because we get to see more data, and this is more important due to the situation we're living today and how we can diversify productivity in a territory such as the northern region of Chile with the mining. So there are other lagoons, Laguna Brava, which are circled in red, were also studied, or the Green Laguna, which is right here and has microbiology specificity. So these are the systems in which we need to focus and go deeper in the approach we have developed until now. And we should also consider these specificities when the authority is working with plans to work on these protective areas of the high Andean Atacama Desert. And now the issues, I'm going to share with you a couple of problems that we have identified due to the study, and these are part of the study, and it has to do with water quality. In the case of Chile, water is a owned resource. It is in the stock market, so all water resources belong, at least a huge part of them belong to the private sector. So this vital resource, such as water, which is not only for a productive activity such as mining, but a whole ecosystem in an extreme environment like the Andean zone, water becomes an obstacle to develop other types of activities that could diversify the regional economy. The second point has to do with the effort carried out by the Chilean state in order to broaden the Andean zone in Atacama, which is the one we studied, and it's located here in the upper part of this map. So this blue zone corresponds to the protected area we're promoting in the Andean zone, and these are where the lagoons and rivers that we studied are. So this is a project that is moving forward, and we are adding a new national park in which, fortunately, the data we produced, the one that I presented right now and the one I presented that I will present later from my colleague, have helped us with evidence in order to broaden the petitions to cover protected areas and to make them wider in the Andean area. This is another national park that exists in the Andean region, and it has this peculiar form. It comes down with a river up down to a lagoon, the lagoon of Negro Francisco, and then up here, I'll show you with my mouse, it covers a little bit of the salt flat. So you see here an area which is light blue, that is a salt flat, and it's connected to the Santa Rosa Lagoon. And there's a conflict here. There are different type of conflicts. The Maripunga salt flat has lithium extractive activities within the salt flat, but because it's divided into two, there is a limit. And so on one side, the lithium extraction or mining lithium is permitted inside the salt flat, but not on the other side. So this approach is very difficult because these are management limitations that don't really address the ecosystem as a whole. So we don't know how to protect in a national park half of a salt flat and a lagoon if the whole system is connected to the other half of the salt flat that is experiencing extracting activities such as lithium in this case, because any impact that will have in the external part of the salt flat, sorry, of the park will have an impact in the protected area. So there is a management issue that has to do with land ownership, water ownership, and the solutions we found are solutions that are not addressing the natural resources. So to give you a clearer picture, 6 or 7 years ago, the Santa Rosa Lagoon came dry during spring and summer, and no one knew why. There wasn't a study. We weren't able to do any studies until one researcher did. And we thought that due to the salt flat of Maricumba, might have been the responsible for drying out the Santa Rosa Lagoon, which is inside the park. But these are precedents that could never be proved. But what we do know is that if we want to protect this area, we cannot have a administration or administrative division. So we presented this to all the shareholders. We presented the results of our project and we showed them. And finally, thanks to the result we came up with, we were able to add value to the landscape. We gave this landscape more value due to these aquatic systems that where a lot of organisms inhabit and gives us these interesting landscape. In the configuration, we have the salt crabs that gives us this Pinterest landscape, the colors of the water, the calmness that it emanates. And from a touristic point of view, this has a lot of potential, and we believe it should be developed. Perhaps not as a replacement of the mining activity, because it's not about replacing it with something else, but rather to supplement the mining activity with other types of activities that allow local shareholders could act and gain benefits, financial benefits that this type of territory can offer. That's why we work a lot in adding value to the landscape and showing what benefits we can bring out of it, getting all of this out to the community. These are some of the visual resources we use to disseminate what we found. So these are images of landscapes that we were able to develop and post up at schools and different presentations we had in the region. We also gave some to the regional government so that they could also disseminate it. And so that way we could make more visible all the organisms that live there. We have the flora, fauna, reptiles. All of these components are very important in the Andean zone. And this book of landscapes has been very well welcomed, very well received. These are all photographs taken from the traveling we did. This is a guide in several languages, specifically to support touristic activities. We also have field guides of reptiles, birds, mammals, and flora. And we also have landscape, history, and ecology. All of this explained in a very simple language based on science, but in a way that any person, even if someone doesn't have scientific knowledge or this type of knowledge, could still understand, could become interested, and would want to visit this territory and get to know it better. So this exercise involved a series of elements, and our takeaways of all of this, I would say, is that the Andean region, such as this one with an extreme weather pattern, if we don't know it or understand it, we won't be able to manage it correctly. This type of region offers a lot of potential to diversify economic activities, not only lithium mining, but other productive activities such as ecotourism or biotechnology activities, especially how to use them in these specific ecosystems, and many others that we could discover in the future. Of course, there's still a lot to do. We did a lot of progress in making all of this visible and publishing all of the scientific guides. We're still working on publishing more information, but I do think it's a huge leap in regards of getting to know a territory that has a high potential with ecological characteristics that can give a lot of benefits. And now I believe it's my colleague who will talk about all the flora, fauna, the species found there. And this exists because of the water bodies. If there's water, there is flora and fauna. Without water, there is none of it. So the state of vulnerability of some of the organisms that are there are very crucial for government to discuss more in order to broaden the protective area. So that's why we worked with a multidisciplinary team, experts from different areas that flew to our university, to the University of Chile, with a team of Osvaldo and Jimena, where different experts were able to travel to the region, get the information, and then give it back to the community, to the technician, to the scientific community, so that they could do a better job at management and managing this area, which has a lot of potential. And we need to diversify the activities, not only focus on one activity like we have been doing up until now. That's all for me. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias, Jorge.
Thank you so much, Jorge, and congratulations on this presentation. I will give the floor to Jerry Maranjo, who will give us a presentation on the flora and fauna characteristics of, in this territory. Jerry, you have the floor. Thank you, Jimena. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for this invitation. And adding to what Jorge was saying, our vision was in some way to scale up the research in order to respond, or rather raise some questions. The first question was, what were we going to find up there? There wasn't a catalog or any documentation where we could see the information of what we could find in the high Andean ecosystems. So in this first slide, we see what we found in the year 2013 in the system. So we traveled through 22. There are 25 in total, and those of them that have more abundance in flora and fauna are 22. These are the ones where we can find some sort of trace from these animals. So our flora and fauna team, and as part of the team, my objective was to present the evidence we found. So some of the background, as Jorge mentioned, to our left, we have Chile. Chile is one of the longest country in the hemisphere, and it's very particular because at the southern part it's part of a island system. In fact, many years ago, when we started to discover the system, it was seen as an isolated one. So with that principle, we started raising questions. For example, how would these animals be distributed within the system, and how would they be in the basic process of the high Andean region? So you see here a distribution, which is A. The letter A shows us how it moves from the coast to the Andean region. So this is the geography from 0 degrees of altitude up to the 900s that we can reach at the salt flats. Of course, we cannot reach the highest one, which is 6,900. We only reached the UNAC region with 5,000 meters. And that's where the study took place for the last 5 or 6 years. In image B, you're able to see a map with some colors. So yes, in image B, in red, you see the proposal that Jorge presented of some systems. These are the systems that we proposed with the Forestry Commission in order to have a new protection area. So at the lower part of image B, you see that the current national park, Nevado Tres Cruces, is there, and to the right, that same map, you see a small square, which is in red, and not so long ago, this was established as a potential protected area. And in image C, we see how in this area of the high Andean region in green, we see rainfall. And from north to south, there's less rainfall in the north than in the south. So as my colleague just mentioned, this establishes that water concentration will attract more life to some places than others. And that's why the national park, Nevado Tres Cruces, was built there, or rather limited there. Having said that, our task was to assess in what way the systems within this huge context in the highest part of the Atacama region, how they were facing what was coming. And so we found very pristine areas. However, from 2014 to 2020, in image B, all the sectors that are in red are sectors that have a permit for exploration. This is an exploration permit, not exploitation permit, yet. However, there is a environmental qualification resolution which allows companies, once they do their exploration, if it's positive, they could be able to exploit it. So out of the 22 systems that are there, 9 have exploration permits, including the largest salt flats.
Siguiendo con el tema del agua, nos podemos ver en esta figura
So continuing with the water issue, here in the southern part where we have most of the rainfall throughout the year, we see this salt flat up here, and it's one of the most important salt flats here in the symposium called Maricumbo, which is in this part of the region. And as Jorge mentioned, it's linked to another system, which are more to the south, to the east and west. So it's quite an intense area. So that part that was chosen to be exploited had permits since 1988. But 7 years ago, no more than 7 years ago, a new law, 1913, allowed them to explore first and to exploit the land afterwards. These systems allows us to see how 3/4 of what we have studied could be exploited nowadays. To the left, the red circle in the middle has the Maricumba salt flats, and to the right we have the green lagoon. Two important centers that have been assessed over the last 6 or 7 years. What did we find? That's the most important question. There is a very important researcher in Chile called Gajardo, and he established certain formats of vegetation, and we were able to find 5. Out of those 5 types of vegetation, separating flora and fauna and vegetation from the system, we were able to establish 21 species with 12 families. They were distributed among the salt flats, rivers, and lagoons. And this is the main design of it. We understand that the first condition in order to have life is flora and vegetation for larger animals, of course. So during these 5 or 6 years that we worked there, we realized that in these 22 systems, there were only 21 species. And this might appear like a low number. However, we need to take into account the conditions, which are quite variable and extreme. If we were to assess, for example, when we talk about the load charge of a system, the Malthusiana region gives us exponential numbers, but in the 60s and 70s, and even nowadays, we know that in order to establish these load capacities for the system, they need an important load of variables. This is where we have the important role of chemistry and physics united with biology. That's how we were able to establish the systems and how they were developing, and we were able to find the different species of vertebrae that we were looking for. So once we determined the fauna within the system, we found 5 species of reptiles, 10 species of mammals, and 62 birds, species of birds. This is important because although it's a low number, you need to consider all the variables that need to come together in this system, where we have 2 or 3 meters of snow at some points, or even more, and the rainfall is high during the austral winter. We also need to consider summer season is very long, and and the heat is very high. So we need to take all of these factors into account, these physical, chemical, and biological factors that are united in one space and that will only allow the survival of the fittest. And so there are two species that we assess, those with high mobility and low mobility. The low mobility species are the ones we're looking at, reptiles. 4 of them are endemic, which means that only belong to the Atacama region and the high Andean region. And one of them, which is the 5th species, is a micro-endemic species. It means that it can only be found in one of the areas of the whole region. Also, the mammals we found, which were 10, such as foxes and micro mammals, are distributed randomly throughout all the systems we assessed. Fortunately, these mammals are able to move more than reptiles, and that's why we find them distributed amongst all the systems. And finally, migratory bird species, they fly, so it's easy for them to fly from one water of land to another one, depending on the characteristics as well. Even though there are some systems that have extreme specificities with the salt levels and many other characteristics, we still found birds. So we found most birds, and we found 13 species of flamingos, the 3 of them, which are present in Latin America, and ducks as well. So large number of ducks in all 22 systems. So we can say the following. Although all systems have different characteristics and allow 74 species to live within them, our second question was, what level of protection do these areas have? Because they have vertebrate animals, fauna, and flora and vegetation. And we realized that out of the 9 most important ones, only 1 of them was mostly protected, which is the Maricumba salt flat. The other ones that have an association with important elements of fauna didn't have any type of protection. And this is why we decided to modify the system in order to expand the existing park or have a new park or find another system to protect the animals in this area. So here in table A, you will see the biological matrix. This means how biologically animals are linked within the sectors that do not have protection, the ones that we recommend to protecting, and the national park. And you'll see it's quite interesting because it allows us to interpret all systems as quite unified. There are very few animals that are outside the protection reserve. However, when you see slide B, you will be able to find 3 different situations. So what's not protected and doesn't have any proposal is independent from what is proposed and from what exists. And that's where we have our main concern of exploiting some of the systems. Yes, go.
Así se ve el sistema altoandino cuando uno lo visita.
This is the Andean Plateau. When you visit it, you can see a large number of elements. And this is Maricunga, the salt field for the symposium, where we can see the way in which it's divided. As my colleague said, a system on the right-hand side. You can see the picture of how it looks physically. We can see the different type of vegetation, the different fauna, flamencos, ducks, but from an administrative standpoint, it cannot not be divided or broken up, because when you exercise pressure in one part of this area, the red one, the pressure will exercise the same on the southern region. Hence, it would indicate that although it is protected, if the system is exploited, in some way or another, things will be seen altered concerning those animals that live on that side of the salt flat. And this is the system at present today. We have stated, let's go back one slide. We have said that each one of these elements, the salt fields or the lagoons or the rivers that are altered in a certain way, will cause some sort of conditioning, which will not allow the normal development of these animals. And this for a simple reason, as I said, because things haven't been assessed fully, the load capabilities and the collectiveness, the rates, the occurrence, the indexes. Well, as a matter of fact, we do have a baseline, but we're only able to say what exists in terms of abundance, only that, and maybe in terms of density. But it's impossible at present to be able to give you more elements to be able to say to the authorities or companies that are exercising these pressures what might happen within the system. Let me repeat that. One back. This is the Maricunga salt pan under the conditions in which we found it. This is the lateral sector that Jorge spoke about, Santa Rosa. The next one, where we're able to see an important amount of information for a report provision or taking, and this is how we saw it 9 years ago. And probably things have changed somewhat. And here we're able to see the formation of the Lama River, which is besides, or it is part of the Santa Rosa, it's part of El Pantanillo and Maricunga, adjacent to this. And here we can see Lagoon of Negro Francisco. It's the most central lagoon throughout the world, where we see a large concentration of flora, vegetation, vertebrates in all the studies that have taken place. Let me stop here a few moments. It has to do with Laguna Verde, although it's a sector that has no protection whatsoever, but it's at the highest level. It's being explored at present, and like Maricunga, it has, they've been working here, and it'll not stop. Now, the problem here concerning these sectors is the following. And this is a new picture. This is Maricunga and Laguna Verde. This is the contrast between both systems. Now, when I was talking about the low mobility animals, I was talking about reptiles, especially here in this region, and here in the Andean highlands, we can find 5 species. They're distributed and they're under the conservation category. What does it mean? Well, under which conditions they're found, following certain parameters. Are they in danger? Are they vulnerable? Under extinction? And unfortunately, many are not. Fortunately, many are not. So what we're seeing, what's happening, these species that live in these specific locations, they're incapable of moving towards other locations. The mobility range of these animals is not more than 25, 30 meters. Thus, it means if somebody exploits this ecosystem, surely they might alter their environment. And this might mean a high rate of mortality, a low rate of migration, and of course, other issues. But the concerning thing when we talk about Maricunga and we talk about Laguna Verde, we find two species which are endemic in the region of the Andean Plateau, and in certain cases, they're micro-endemic. In other words, this means the darker line that I drew there that points to the three individuals, which are called La Dialemus andino, are only found in this lagoon. Hence, it means if it's explored and then exploited, talking of the lagoon, then the individual will disappear. In other words, the possibility of extinction is quite high. This means that in the mid and long range, if you analyze any study that you wish to utilize, well, we'll see that as a matter of fact, these species, because of the large amount of animals, the density of individuals found there, that at present it has nothing to do with the load capability of the system that allows them to survive. In other words, it's the alteration, the pressure that will be exercised on these animals might do them or eliminate them from the system. And this is serious, taking into account that animals, to be able to be rescued and relocated, otherwise there should be sites with similar characteristics. Unfortunately, each Andean plateau is independent and it's different. Hence, in conclusion, there are no two Lagunas Verdes, neither two Maricundas. In other words, what we get from Maricunda and what is transferred to another location, if that's our intention to be able to solve this exploitation system and suffering of these animals, well, these locations would not be found. In conclusion, concerning the low mobility organisms, in this case, two important species for the Andean Plateau, eventually, if these regions are exploited because water is the most relevant part of the system, and if there's no water, of course, it will affect the flora and vegetation, and thereafter, it will affect vertebrae. And the first vertebrate line that exists in these sectors are reptiles, which are the most sensitive under these circumstances. Mammals, they're lucky enough, and here we can see the Lycolopex sculpeus, a puma, punk color, that's found. We did find it when working out there, when researching the Andean Plateau. The difference between mammals and reptiles, mammals can move, and they can move big distances. In other words, a fox can more or less move 7 kilometers in a night. The puma, 180 kilometers, where they can move around. Hence, they will be affected in a lesser degree. They have more spaces to be able to move towards, but there are other mammals like rats, for example, at least 2 species, which is the Abrotix olivaceo and the Philus antilophyxus. Although they do move, they're more sensitive because I insist each one of the sectors that we checked, Maritunga, Laguna Verde, Santa Rosa, Pantanillo, they have different characteristics. In other words, if I move this animal and I locate it, otherwise for this animal to reproduce and continue with a normal development, well, this is something to be seen because extreme conditions in the Andean Plateau are not similar to other locations in the case of Chile and in the world at large. The good news, nevertheless, is that although certain sectors might be exploited, in other words, 9 of the 22 that we have assessed, surely birds will be the least affected, or apparently the least affected. In this region, fortunately, there aren't many places where we have been able to determine that there are bird nests, particularly talking about the flamingos. Out of the 3 species, there are 1 or 2. But no, it hasn't been quite successful in a natural way because they prefer other regions, other sectors, like, for example, other regions a little bit more distant, 200, 300 kilometers distant. But other species, like, for example, the ducks and the other birds, which are smaller birds and passerine birds, do nest in these sectors. So eventually a reduction in water might eventually affect them, but no monitoring system has been defined that might establish the second baseline after exploitation to be able to establish which will be the measures taken in the near future. And I wanted to show you here a few of the greatest things that you can find up above. These are the 3 species of flamingos. There are hawks, peregrine hawks, vicuñas, guanacos, reptiles, and micro mammals. All of them coexist in a network. In other words, they all depend one from each other. If, for example, I remove a fox and I remove a flamingo, or I do away with the existence of other species, the network is so intricate that each one of these 75 species does have a role, and the role still has not been specifically determined or faithfully defined within the Andean plateaus. But if water disappears or there is less water, importantly so, most probably is that some of these species will be extinct or on their path to extinction. As you can see on the map, we are trying to see how many animals and how these are distributed. The red circles, I'm placing the elements we're analyzing, which are Maricunga and Laguna Verde. These are 2 important sites. One, from an administrative perspective, it contains 50% for exploitation purposes, and eventually it might generate an important alteration in these systems. And on the right-hand side, Laguna Verde, where the same thing, unfortunately, will happen. And it's very difficult to establish which will be the consequences in a 5, 10, or 15-year period. Thank you. As conclusions, I wish to state that we're not against the existence of lithium mining. We merely need to think about how we will be managing each one of the actions that will take place. Generally speaking, in Latin America, legislation is quite lax and therefore or negligent. So definitely they are not clear with regards to effective remediation aspects when we talk about metal, non-metal, metallic mining circumstances. Hence, lithium mining, it's a good possibility from an economic perspective for a country. Undoubtedly, it's good, although it provides much labor, but this has to go hand in hand with effective measures or measures which will allow the flora and vegetation of these sensitive systems not suffer great alterations. Now, another element based on our judgment that might affect is non-regulated tourism, which does create alterations within these systems, because you might know that a van that goes through a sector or on a salt pan or on the edge of a lagoon, of course, they leave a lot of debris behind them. So let's remember you have the macrobiome, carpets, the invertebrates, vertebrates, and others. Hence, alterations when you do not know how tourism needs to take place in a proper manner. Well, it's very important to understand what will happen and how things will be assessed with regards to the animals living there. And lastly, we wish to say that in spite of the big efforts, from the Catholic University and the regional universities with Antofagasta and with the regional government, our suggestions have not been used. In other words, to be able to assess how each one of these circumstances will be faced within these salt fields that will be explored and thereafter exploited, how to regulate tourism in these plateaus in the Andean region, how to apply each one of the recommendations that we're conveying with the goal in mind for each one of these exploitations to make sense, not only from an economic perspective, but also socially, but especially with regards to taking care of biodiversity. Thank you.
Ahí está el equipo. Y esos son los...
Is the team, and these are the animals that exist in that region. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Yeri, por esta interesante presentación que nos deja obviamente un poco preocupados. Voy a
Thank you for the lecture, which leaves us very concerned. Let's give the floor to Osvaldo, and thereafter we're going to summarize the presentations, and we'll go on to the Q&A. Osvaldo, you have been recognized. Thank you, Jimena, and thank you to the organization of the University of Virginia, Michigan, and of course our own university. I'm very glad to be able to share this panel with you together with Jorge and Yeri, we've been able to carry out different studies concerning these subject matters. Can you all see my screen? Thank you. This presentation that I will share with you is related to be able to reflect on the role of the architecture and landscape in the process of rehabilitation and integration of landscape in these operations, in these fragile, sensitive, and weak landscapes, which are related to lithium mining in salt pans, and also within other contexts of mining that are taking place in similar sites with similar value. Thus, the idea of my talk is to be able to present certain thoughts concerning the impact of lithium and how architecture and landscape architecture can contribute to establish this necessary intermediation and also anticipation, we might say, and thereafter also rehabilitation and reparation of these sites. This is a pilot experience that we have developed not only on territories or lithium mining territories, but rather territories that share a series of issues and characteristics that are linked amongst each other to these mining operations in the case of lithium mining operations. Now, this research and the development of the project that we shall be presented is enshrined within the research work in the Laboratory of Landscapes and Green Infrastructure within the Laboratory of the Catholic University, which is related to assessing the research problems concerning landscape architecture, especially related to planning and design of the landscape and the contemporary challenges in cities and territories and solutions based on nature to adapt and for resilience purposes from a climate and disaster perspective, the valuation of ecological systems and cultures that convey an identity to the different territories. Now, the themes are divided into 3 lines of investigation based on the nature, green urban infrastructure, adaptation of climate change, the reduction of disaster, together with a project that we've worked with Jorge and Mr. Izaga that are here, Madam Arizaga that's here with us. And secondly, planning, conservation, and value of these cultural landscapes as a strategic resource, and of course, things that have to do with the impact of mining in those territories that precisely need to generate innovation systems to be able to sustain the local economies, and also rehabilitation and integration from a landscape perspective concerning these mining environments within a very valuable environmental landscape. And these are part of the characteristics that we can see on the screen, which are associated to these territories where mining activities take place, where, as we can see on the image, these small interventions have high incidence, especially from a visual perspective, but also from an ecological perspective, because these regions hold this, hence alterations generated by mining within these contexts are an important study field that from a landscape architecture we can handle so as to be able to guide these interventions with the purpose and the objective to be able to integrate these transformations of the territory with a planning and design in mind. From this perspective, this body, the saline body, which is found in the plateau, found in the lithium mining system in Chile, it is quite difficult. This is associated to the challenges for conservation purposes and to, of course, be able to face these mining challenges. And of course, we have had to research this in terms of this project as a pilot project, which is about to be developed within these contexts in the lithium mining system. And as we've been saying, not only at this symposium and previously, but also with regards to other activities that we've had with the University of Virginia. As a matter of fact, lithium mining, we might say that if we remove what we see in the image, it generates alterations from a landscape perspective that on the one hand side has an impact with water, the soil, vegetation, ecologically speaking, the quality of air, as mentioned before. But basically, this might be summarized in alterations in the aesthetic attributions, which of course have an impact in the quality of the landscape and compromises the values that we understand and have seen in their natural state. Nevertheless, the site operations that have these contexts also generates impacts with regards to a deficit in the planning concerning alternative usage, like, for example, usages related to tourism. And here we can see, thanks to the images on the screen, that there are alterations and impacts which are not necessarily assessed and studied, and therefore the need to rethink the way in which we generate these interventions in these contexts. Not only is it all related to mining activities, but also to other usage which are linked to the land. So the question is, what is the role of landscape architecture, which is our sphere in which we've focused our research to be able to mediate and coordinate the design of the modifications and changes in the landscape? This takes us back from a landscape tradition to the issues concerning interventions and operations in the different sites that might be connected with the work linked to different practices that from the perspective of the design, of course, these have been able to coordinate things with designs with a purpose beyond the work or the event or the intervention, because it also generates repercussions, which we might say establish additional values concerning those territories where these interventions take place, as we can see on this image, because of the work that took place by Robert Smithson in the spiral jetty. From that point of view, we might recognize three principles. And we can connect with Mr. Oskams and Mota's work to be able to understand the design as a tool to be able to empower these spontaneous works, and thereafter to produce actions that will follow authentic criteria. The second principle is related to designing, to visualizing processes where human beings might have access and experiment. In other words, to visualize stories which will have an influence and are related to these interactions amongst humans on that side, and the projects can contribute to social accessibility of these natural spaces or wilderness of those natural spaces that are being intervened with productive practices. And finally, the third principle addresses the design to provide new connections, new possibilities between existing processes through collaborations concerning these productive practices, practices that might be associated to conservation and other uses, as we realized or carried out annexed to tourism. So we definitely can see all these interesting cases. In other words, to establish these environments that might follow these principles. Taking into account what has been said concerning the interventions generated on these sites, we've recognized different strategies that have been divided into these four spheres, and they constitute a summary of a hypothesis. In other words, which might be these access points concerning the landscape discipline towards the planning of these sites. First of all, access and visualization, and we'll now give you a few examples applied to a pilot project that we are developing in another mining sphere related to other mining activities. And secondly, the buffering and connectivity specifically, and the singularity, mimesis, and own attributions of these sites, and the replacement and rehabilitation of the landscape components that have been altered. Now, these four strategies that we're are related to the components of the landscape that are submitted to these different alterations. Basically, four are related to soil and vegetation, which are considered as those components of the landscape that have a strong location conditions, which are recognizable under these perspectives that we can identify as landscape patterns. Secondly, water and air that contribute greater complexity in terms of management and assessment of the impact that is generated. And thirdly, in terms of usage, mining infrastructure, and on the other hand, usage, in this case, for tourist purposes, which might be associated to other possible usage that are established in that territory.
This can be found indigenous peoples, communities.
Ya debería de acabar esto.
The different components and the strategy we have been analyzing makes us understand that unifying the landscape planning and its design can be successful whenever there's a linkage and articulation with the strategies before mentioned and handling the different landscape components that are submitted to the potential impacts or effects due to mining activity. On the screen, you see a reference which is important to us, which has to do with the space of the activities in situ, which will give us the ability to mediate through design the different mining activities according to the ecological preservation objectives and compatibility with other potential activities. So I'll show you a pilot case. This is a case that it's not directly linked to lithium mining. It does share a common region, which is the Atacama Desert, and the coastal part has a issue regarding alteration in the landscape components that are similar to the ones we saw previously, related to a mining farm that has to do with a location nearby in that context. We're talking about the area at the center of continental Chile, which is the coastal part of the central Andes. There's still a transition way for climate between the desert aspect and the Mediterranean type weather. And it's a region that is characterized by a high level of vegetation, of endemic flora and fauna. There are some specific areas that are protected and that promote cultural values and protection values from these components. As we see on the screen, we see the territories in which mining activity has been developed, and we can understand in this broad aspect they are still focused on the valleys, but they are linked to the highlands as well, and up the way to the plains where we are developing the project. So by the valley of the Huasco River and where it comes out, and the village, the city with the same name. This is where the mining project is located. That is also linked to the pellets area, which is a large industrial infrastructure that processes the material that is extracted from the region. And so the waste, the debris is the one that will be deposited here in this area, where you can see is a sort of valley, but has a huge impact in the vegetation and ecological fauna and flora, and also other impacts in other sectors such as touristic sectors or using the natural resources there. The project's objective is to develop a reintegration and refurbishing landscape through in mining background so that there can be more accessibility and taking as a pilot case the area of the pellet Huasca location. So we understand landscape as a infrastructure to the social restructuring, and we also take phytotechnology, so structure-based solutions and vegetation system solutions so that we can solve these landscape issues. So this is where the project is located, and the main infrastructures, the productive infrastructures. From this point of view, there isn't only an impact in the direct area where the debris is deposited, but other lineal infrastructures as well. For example, mobility, transportation, storage, water management, and of course, transporting the material from one zone to another. So all of this causes a lot of alteration and of course impacts that could be divided in two main categories: visual intrusion, that was also present in the previous cases with the salt flats lithium mining, and the biophysical and aesthetic byproducts that are emanated from the production and the different operational stages. I won't go into detail within this table, but we see the different characteristics that are established in these impacts, not only in the area of the debris, but all the other infrastructures that are part of this huge mining system, and of course are linked to intrusion and alteration impacts to the landscape. Another objective of the project is to develop an intervention method that will allow us to interconnect in an organized way the different mitigation ecological processes through different interventions that will allow us to establish a space ordinance within the mining activities and other supplementary activities that are linked to work in favor of assessing accessibility and the rehabilitation of altered sites due to mining activities. From this perspective, the compensation and mitigation measures can be resumed in these 6 components: visibilization, mimetization, reposition, connection, buffering, and singularization. And all of these are interconnected to other activities that are called the master plan, with components and programs that can give us a better geographical space in the territory. We also went through the definitions of the landscapes and the different areas such as Parc La Villette and other ones that are linked to the organization of landscape. This project is based on 3 basic components of the system that are linked to circulation, management areas, and equipment. These are strategic spots within the territory in order to activate specific practices for conservation and management of the components. Circulation will establish a system that will allow us to provide accessibility and will add up to the management of the different areas that are also linked to the territory. As for management areas, these are areas where the implementation is directly involved, where these technologies are implemented. So we have the renovation, reproduction, dissemination of the endemic species of that area, and finally, location of the equipment, which are the strategic spots that will be activated accordingly to the linear and zones matrix. So from this point of view, we have the areas of equipment that we have been establishing thanks to these activation programs in different areas, and that have been organized in 6 implementation stages. These are compatible with the implementation stages of the mining process of the Relave project. So we see an ongoing plan, a progressive plan, so that at the end of this period of time, which is 25 years, at the end we'll have all measures implemented and the landscape could also be better established with its rehabilitation steps. The model started to use this map of lines for the coastal area. And in this sense, it allows us to integrate different operations, the mining operations and other minings that have been adding on due to different infrastructures, such as mobility and touristic means, and other activities that have to do with managing and extracting resources in that region by the local communities. There are 3 priority sectors that have been established, 3 pilot sectors, 2 for viewpoints and another one for an interpretation center. This project allows us to establish and implement these strategies, especially for accessibility and visibility through the viewpoints and this sort of walkthrough or travel with pathways or nature trails that are connected, and we see different activities, and we can also disseminate information. We also have the buffering and connectivity strategy that are related to the linear strategies here at the border of the coast, a road that gives access to the mining activities and also has different characteristics. It has allowed us to have a public road and to connect other strategic points with other areas that have larger landscape value in order to use it. We are also able to see the different interventions of this road that are also linked to the phytotechnologies. We see other point of access that only allow vehicles, but also trails for people to walk. We have as well the singularization system in order to really identify the important point to start off. We also have the rehabilitation and reposition strategies or replacement strategies in which we will replace the endemic vegetation, and these are planted in greenhouses. These are also very important components that will allow us, on the one side, to generate ecological functionality and the replacement of the landscape components, but they also comply with a physical stabilization role of the relevant debris, which is also in this coastal area and which is threatened due to wind erosion and due to the work of vegetation and the soil replacement and other different materials can allow this physical replacement. So the replacement allows us to recompose the landscape components. That way, having a place that has better weather conditions and better landscape components that will allow for a better development of the soil and landscape. Taking into account that this area already had some impacts due to the close presence of other types of activities. These are some images of the pilot areas that have been developed. These are closely linked to the viewpoints. As I mentioned, there are some trails and hiking that can be done. We also want to implement replacement phytotechnology systems, as well as buffering and connectivity strategies for the landscape. So these are some of the components that also have to do with organization and the coordination of the different designs, starting by the planning, the design of the architectural landscape, by making this replacement possible with different development areas for other activities that will add value to the project site, as we see on the images.
Desde ese punto de vista también, la condición de reposición de la vegetación preexistente.
We also see that the vegetation replacement has led us to study different species that were found on site. We're able to do some studies and testing, especially for seeds that were collected. And in that way, we were able to create a parallel activity to the project site, which are the greenhouses. And the local community has been very interested by this. They are wanting to understand how this plant reproduction can be done, which is quite surprising and new in this area. So we're getting to know the endemic vegetation, and this also can be seen as a local development and innovation area for the local economy of the Baja City. And finally, this project has led us to a circular economy research field by studying all of the possibilities that could be established by using these materials, the tailings to construction materials that are found at the bottom of the salt flats. This is a material that has no heavy metals or any reactive materials. So in that way, we can understand alternatives to circular economy in order to reuse these components. So this is also part of a pilot stage we're working on in collaboration with the Laboratory of Rains Construction Material of the Pontificia Universidad Católica.
Osvaldo.
Thank you so much,
your
Osvaldo.
Gracias.
Thank you for your fascinating presentation as well. Before I give the floor to the audience for questions and to congratulate our speakers, I would like to provide a brief summary to what has been said, although it won't be easy. So we listened to Jorge first, who shared about this unknown territory, except for those who inhabited it. And he shared with us the vital resource, which is water. Water, a vital resource that has no
Características adaptadas o tiene
but rather for species that adapt to its characteristics. In that territory, Jorge explained that they were able to identify similarities and specificities amongst the different water bodies, and water is what allows life. And so in order to avoid losing those specificities and those ecosystems, we needed to make them visible, to raise awareness of these places. Instead of opposing to the mining activity, we first need to understand and get to know its situation. And Getty explained that this situation started by understanding the complex network of these 74 species, which is not very well known. These are species that live in extreme weather, extreme conditions, in which a small alteration could create a fatal impact. So the first question I have for our speakers is that vulnerability, that fragile condition, and that singularity, specificity, how is it linked to the idea of needing green energies? And on the other side, it appears that the order of the actions is what is most important. according to what we saw in today's presentation, first we need to know and understand. That's the first step, to know and understand the system, assess the specificities, define the specific location for the extraction activities. That way they won't alter the most peculiar systems. And once identified those specific areas, the next step is to plan. Planning is something that we're lacking in these territories, but we need to plan where landscape can play an important role to design processes, to raise awareness on the impacts, and to be able to provide new connections. Osvaldo then explained how landscape is a infrastructure that supports the processes and also adds value. It rehabilitates, it potentializes and reactivates those territories where rehabilitation can be a potential economic activity, as Osvaldo showed us in his last slides. So those mining voids can be used potentially as an activity for local communities. So in a nutshell, that was the presentations we heard today, and we discovered the territory of the high plains of the Atacama Desert. And now I give the floor to the audience.
¿Preguntas?
Any questions from the audience?
I'm gonna
Maria?
take one from the group here. Thank you so much, Jerry, Jorge, Osvaldo. It has been, very, very interesting. Our students here is half architecture, more than half architecture, urban designers. They are captivated by the reference to this possible reuse of some of the tailing materials into construction materials. And they would like to know more in general how you are looking at this, and also in particular, how do you imagine this also being some of the building blocks that you use in your project? And I don't know, how do you see the commercialization of this? What are some of the lessons, some of the limitations? Just trying to think on how to close the loop and thinking on these circular economies. It seems fascinating how you are also experimenting on this as a possibility.
Well, thank you, Maria. Hello to your students there. Bien, el concepto de economía circular.
So the concept of circular economy, which has become stronger over the last few years due to the need to be able to provide a longer life cycle to specific materials or specific processes, especially in the industry sector. For us, it is a potential development area within the architectural, and it has a very traditional origin because it comes down to reusing material in structures, especially in construction, in order to give them another use. So these are materials that can contribute to other types of processes. When we link this to the mining sector, or the tailing material, we see that it's becoming stronger in Chile, and there are some pilot projects that have allowed us to start developing the application of reusing tailing material for manufacturing granulometry and concrete components. So from that perspective, we started working in that particular case of telling materials in Westbrook so that we can go one step further in this research. So first of all, it's very important for us to link the concept, or rather the components of granulometry with the need of the volume of the waste, the tailing or waste, has to become something that we can reuse. But we're also concerned about finding solutions to consumption practices in rocks or dry material in order to fabricate concrete that will have an impact in extracting sands, soils in the rivers, that will have other ecological, social, and economic, and even cultural impacts, because these rivers are also very delicate landscapes. And so for this specific project, we can say that the possibility of understanding reusing the debris so that they can be used in concrete components has to bring a solution for the waste. And now I might say that it's very marginal because we won't be able to use the whole volume of the tailing materials, but it does imply a symbolic issue that has to do with the ability to reuse something that is seen as waste so that we can give it a new opportunity and be reused. What we're most interested on is to reduce the impact on other industries, such as the extractive industry of of aggregates in rivers. In the project, we are working on this tailing material for concrete, and hopefully at the beginning of 2024, we'll be able to start manufacturing prototypes of these components that could be used as pilot for this park. So regarding urban mobility, concrete paving, construction of infrastructure that could be needed in the park.
Bueno, si no hay más preguntas, me dicen aquí que prontamente nos quedaremos sin intérpretes, así que...
I believe we're running out of time. So if there are any more questions, please go ahead. Otherwise, we'll give a round of applause to our speakers for today.
Yo voy a preguntar otra.
I do have another question, yes.
Ya vi que está, I think esta la pregunta en español y ahora yo traduzco en caso de que os tengáis que ir. Digo
So I can do the
Gracias. Jorge, está muy interesante el trabajo que estáis haciendo.
Jorge, the work you have been doing is very interesting.
Ahora, now I will translate it, don't worry. La colaboración que estáis haciendo con los diseñadores.
And the collaboration you have been doing with the designers.
Estáis abordando la cuestión del cambio climático en el trabajo que estáis
How
haciendo.
have you been working on regarding climate change?
¿Cómo anticipáis esa cuestión? ¿Qué impactos veis a largo plazo teniendo
What
en cuenta
impact do you see in the long term?
el clima?
I apologize, she didn't change the channel, so it's difficult to interpret. Right, thank you so much for this question. The study we carried out in this area did not include the climate change assessment as an element to be analyzed. In order to do that, we need to do long-term studies, and what we did was a short-term assessment for a determined period of time to see how the behaviors and specifically the characteristics and infrastructure in order to have a environmental impact assessment that will incorporate the climate change factor. We need a longer time in order to assess the variability. so that we can project it longer term. However, we do have an opinion on how to carry out this type of study. So when we talk about climate change, there are two characteristics to take into account that impact the whole world and that gives us a projection regarding how climate will behave in the next 50 or 100 years. We have the models, those models exist, and the other component is the local one. This means that we cannot extrapolate global models that are being used right now to a local scale, where eventually the behavior of the atmosphere at this local scale will be very different. We do know that the most important patterns that will be impacted in the Andean region and coastal region will be rainfall. Regarding rainfall, we don't know in what sense yet, and also temperature, which will cause a change in the seasons, the characteristics of the seasons. Perhaps we won't have a lot of rain in winter, but rather in spring, or we won't have a lot of snow like we do now. And so we consider this in the best way possible, which is using local data that will allow us to calculate the local variabilities of the local atmosphere, and that's how we can project what could possibly happen.
Muchísimas gracias. Ya somos buenos, no tenemos más preguntas por acá. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much. That will be all of our questions. Thank you.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Si no hay más preguntas.
Thank you so much. If there are no further questions, a round of applause.
Thank you, everyone, also for the translators today. This is very appreciated.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Chao, gracias.
Thank you.
Thank
Gracias.
you.
Bye, Maria.
Chao, Osvaldo.
See you soon. Bye.